Hello, and welcome to another episode of Automate to Dominate, our podcast that features AI for small businesses that are really looking to try to bridge the gap between, highly technical, very confusing field with how do we use the human element to really enhance what our businesses are trying to achieve. I've got a very special guest with me today, Brandon Parks. He is the owner and CEO of a company called AtlasRx, and they specialize in really optimizing the pharmaceutical medical rep field to really get the best out of their day. And I'm not going to steal his thunder, Brandon. I'll let you get into it. But before we dive into the actual company and all the great things you guys have to offer, which I think is really an awesome niche kind of play that you developed. Very cool. I'm sure the audience will love to hear about that. But let's just kind of talk about, your background, a little bit around your history, how you got into this field, and then ultimately we can kind of dive into all the great things you're doing with your business.
Yeah, sounds good. No, thanks for having me. A little bit about my background is I got into pharmaceutical sales roughly 10 years ago as a rep, just kind of fell into the industry. Recruiter reached out and honestly, I didn't really know much about it, but it sounded interesting. I like sales. I like talking to people. So got into the industry and I remember this, and this is kind of the foundation of how I started the company and where I was going. First day in the field, went through all the training Sunday night before I started. And I spent countless hours diving through a target list of 300 providers, addresses, Googling, putting down the perfect route. And it was like, okay, I know I'm going tomorrow. I'm going to have a great day, go in there, get to my first call. Takes way longer than expected. And talk to the provider, get a signature, and I ended up messing up on my platform, the CRM that we're using, and I deleted his signature for a sample. So now I had to wait another hour for him to come back and do this. So morning is shot because it's taken me way longer. My routing is completely blown up for the day. I don't know where I'm going. I'm in Los Angeles. Traffic is terrible. I was like, all right, just keep going, get to my next office. And that office doesn't exist anymore. That provider is no longer there because I had the wrong address on there. So now I'm just exactly back and back and back. So that's kind of my first foray into it. And one of those, you learn over time, you get better at your routing, you get better at figuring out where your offices are. You kind of learn it by the back of your hand. But I always had this thought in the back of my mind of how can we use technology to do this better? I'm spending hours on a spreadsheet. I'm putting together everything manually. I'm updating addresses, and I'm not only putting stuff into my CRM, but I'm putting it into my own routing document as well, spending hours and hours and hours. Figuring that out, get through there. And then I became a manager, got into management, running my own team. And one thing I saw across the board was how variable routing was for other reps. So this kind of brought that idea back into my mind of like, okay, there's got to be something here. And then working with my co-founder and partner and just talking with him a little bit of like, hey, here's my idea. Can we do something? And he noodled on it for a little bit. I noodled on it some more. A couple years go by and we're like, you know what? There's something here. Let's go all in on this because I think this is a problem that I continue to see and that we can have a solve for. So that was the genesis of Atlas RX in general, just to create a application that reps can easily use in the field to use technology to plan out the perfect routes for them so they can be efficient and reduce all that cognitive load and they can get that competitive edge in their territory to be able to do what they need to do in the field without all that extra work or routes being blown up because offices don't exist or not knowing where to drive to.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, such just hearing it, not knowing a whole lot about your field. I've been in sales most of my career too. And what I do know about, I've got friends in the same field is, it's very high transactional. It's moment to moment to moment. And having something like this as a tool to really just kind of help maximize your efficiency in your day and your throughput. And it's just off the cuff seems like it's a no-brainer for anybody that's in that business, right? So I'm excited for you. It sounds like a really great offering. And maybe you can spend a little bit of time around, so you thought of this means, this mechanism for people to be really efficient. You said you got a partner that, kind of helped you with that. Can you walk me through a little bit around some of the technical acumen that you guys thought of that really, kind of brings the two worlds together?
Yeah, absolutely. We really started out building it backwards. We had the idea how to having a routing algorithm, if you will, and it's actually a number of different algorithms built on top of each other because there's a lot of decisions to make in the process, right? It's not just finding the most efficient routes and grouping geographies together. There's also appointments and lunches and scheduled events that reps need to be to. Providers are not always in the office 8 to 5, 5 days a week. So, how do we factor those in? How do we factor traffic and driving distance and then frequency and reach of visits? Because in pharmaceutical sales, reps aren't just getting a transaction. They're not calling on a provider and saying, okay, yep, got a signature on the line and I move on to the next one. It's constant repeating visits. So each provider has a different cadence that is going to work well for them and a different priority based on their prescription data, their volume, all these things. So there's so many different factors that go into it. So we kind of started out as like, okay, what do we want the end result to be? And then work backwards through all these little problems to get there. So I was, more involved in just kind of that logic, helping build that out. My partner is more technical of like, okay, here's the algorithm that can do this, here's the algorithm that can do that. And once we had a pretty solid routing base, then we go, okay, now how do we make this simple to use for the end user? How do we make something very simple that reps can just log in, see what they're doing, few clicks, but not so convoluted that it's going to take more time for them to figure out how to use it than actually go there. So we kind of built that in the background and really kept that mentality of simplicity in our app and our user interface to make sure that if it's, not there, it's not needed kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great way to look at it, right? Yeah, we to the audience listening, we had a little teaser. Brandon and I had a pre-call, and we talked about, what are some of the things that would really, benefit the audience. And one of the things that you mentioned in our previous conversation was it's not always the easiest thing to go and schedule time, especially with medical, practitioners and people that own their offices. And it's very moment to moment for them. They bill constantly. That's how they make their money. So just curious from an AI perspective, have you given any thought to, what can I implement, or maybe you've already done this in your solution that kind of identifies a target that you're trying to get to in such a way that isn't, I'm just going to show up and hope they're there, right? And it's hard to get people on calendars because they're always being, you know, so in front of patients and everything. But I'm just curious if you have you explored any AI technology around what can I do to really help the person in the field kind of get to those key decision makers or the people that will influence what they're trying to sell.
Yeah, no, great point. So I wouldn't say we're implementing a lot of like AI into it. It is and it isn't, right? It's a lot of kind of machine learning and heavy data analysis. So very similar concepts. But what we look at is where the reps have been and if it's a successful visit or not. So if it's a successful visit, it keeps track of the time, when that day was, and everything like that. If it if it wasn't a successful visit, it keeps track of that too. And so over time, the algorithm and the app learns with that territory rep based on their geography, their providers, and what their successful or not successful calls are, and it finds the best time to call on those providers. So reps do have the ability to put in manual inputs of availability, but at the same time, the app and the algorithm is learning with them. So even if they don't put that in, it will find those best times to visit the provider to increase the likelihood of a successful call.
I love it. So you are kind of doing your own learning module to a certain
We
degree
are.
and
Yep.
seeing best practices and what's working, what's not working. So that has to be a huge benefit first. Even if it's not being able to identify a specific person at a specific time, you could start to see trends on where people are maybe more in the office or when they're not, that type of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So in the benefit of there for the reps is they don't have to think about it. A lot of reps, will naturally just have that second sense or like third sense. It's like, okay, yep, I know this provider. This is a good time to visit them. But reality is that might not be the best time to visit them. They just, there's so many different hour slots during the day. There's, patient flow, all these things, but every office typically has some kind of downtime or some kind of time where the provider isn't necessarily scheduled. They're doing chart notes, they're doing follow-ups, they leave a little bit of vacancy. And our app with that, learning over time will help find those pockets of best times to see those providers.
Yeah, I love that. That's absolutely awesome. And as you're talking about it, I'm also thinking to myself, that's a lot of, kind of tribal knowledge, right? So oftentimes if reps just get into a pattern of knowing when to show up,
Yep.
that knowledge of that walks out the door when if they walk out the door, right? So I
Absolutely.
got to imagine a huge benefit to, employers hiring, medical reps, pharmaceutical reps, whatever, is that you're also collecting data that regardless if that person decides to move on, will either help the next person or help just the business with some strategy and things of that nature too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely, keep all that. It stays with it. So when we work with a specific company, we create a unique environment for them. So all of their data is kind of stays in. So if reps move on and a new rep comes in, or territory changes, and there's new cuts where a territory, gets split in half, and then a rep comes in, those reps start off on a really strong foot. From being in the industry for so long and being in management, it was always kind of talked about, oh, it takes about 6 months for a rep to get comfortable in their territory to know,
That's the same
our
thing I say. Yeah.
selling point is, hey, it can help speed up that process. So instantaneously reps know who to go, who to visit. They still have to do the work. They still have to make the calls. They still have to call on the providers, but we can help them get there with more efficiency, with faster activation, and not have some of that built up, kind of figuring it out. We always say like some days, reps are just going to go around polish doorknobs, right? Just turn it and no one there. But at the same time, we're trying to reduce that
Yeah,
load so it
the
makes
overhead
make
there.
rep
Yeah, that
more
makes that
efficient.
makes complete sense. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's awesome. As you're talking about a, kind of a day in the life of a rep, I got to imagine that there's some, really great features you could also look to add if it's not already there today around, mileage and does that populated to concur or, some expense tool. So I got to imagine that once you kind of get on the floor, you can really start to scale this thing based upon whatever the provider's needs are, right?
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. So, a little bit around how you go to market. I think it would be good for people that maybe have a SaaS company and they're looking at how to target certain personas, right? We talked a little bit about this on our pre podcast call. You've got a couple different offerings. You've got an offering where an individual just says, man, this is a really great tool. And whether or not my company is on this or not, I would like to use that, right? So that's an avenue you offer to folks. But there's also the kind of corporate, offering as well, where, leaders, managers, maybe C-suite type people, look at their fleet of sales associates that they have. And you're targeting those folks, I'm sure, right? To sell a much larger footprint. Talk to me a little bit around, I'm sure you have a lot of campaigns to go after those folks. I'm sure you're kind of dedicating certain marketing resources to get after those folks. Maybe share with the audience a little bit around, what you're doing to get real specific around the type of persona that you want to sell to. And, is there any creativity to try to, outreach to the
Yeah. So I'll start off with kind of the individual side too. We started out just kind of on the enterprise and just selling to full companies. We thought that was like our best way, just because there's so much we can do in terms of total sales force effectiveness and utilize the call plan. But as we kind of went to market and put some information online and just had some stuff, we actually got reached out to by a lot of reps, individual reps, being like, "Oh, this is amazing. I'm looking for something like this. Can I get access to?" And over time, we're like, "Hey, this is there's something here." So we made some adjustments, made some changes to make it very easy for an individual rep to come on, just sign up, select who they want to see, build out their own territory, and go. And so for that, we're, really just kind of creating some offering, doing some SEO stuff, just the typical just marketing whenever a rep just goes, "Hey, I'm looking for pharmaceutical sales routing," we want to pop up, right? So that's pretty much easy. Yeah, when we look at more of the enterprise model, really the key that we look for is new Salesforce launches, new product launches, or changes in an organization, because usually that change management is where we see a lot of success. So what we look for is utilizing kind of AI subscriptions, alerts to be like, okay, what are product approvals, who's hiring, stuff like that, and then have those generalized reach outs, and those typically see a little bit better, because those are times when, okay, we're launching something new. We have a new sales force coming in, and what we see as an adoption from our platform is when there are major changes like that, and we can roll in and create that adoption and those habit formations early. We see a much better success rate than trying to change a habit from reps who are, just not, I don't want to say stuck in their ways, but have a already way that they're doing things in a company that is already kind of set and okay, we're everything's working, let's not make a change here. So those are the keys we look for.
Yeah, I love that. And you've been in sales management before. I've
Yep.
been in sales management as well. And some of the things that I used to love as a sales leader is it's great to see metrics, right? Metrics of the really good performers. And it's also good to see metrics of the underperformers. And it's not always that it just tells a tale that someone isn't doing the right things, but it might tell the tale of are we optimizing our time the best way, right? So I could see the huge benefit that if an employer was to roll this out to his sales fleet, that you could see, okay, who's my top 20% of my reps? And if that kind of data based upon how they're managing their day and they're cycling through, so many calls and so many appointments and so on and so forth, those metrics start to tell a story versus the ones that maybe don't go to see as many physicians in one day, or maybe are on a bad path that like maybe they're working really hard, but they're just not optimizing that. I got to imagine that, a company that's looking to roll this out to their pharma team or their medical sales team, that has to be a huge benefit to be able to just recognize who's doing really well, who's maybe middle of the pack, who's in lower pack, and that data and how they start to trend and see how their days are managed. I got to imagine is a pretty good return of investment, right, for you guys.
Absolutely. From my experience and from what we hear from others, we always look at, the analytics are there. You can always see how are reps doing against the call plan that has been designated. A lot of companies will have a call plan of like, okay, you need to see this provider, X amount of times, this provider X amount of times, this, and some of the lower priority providers, a little bit fewer, right? And you always have metrics on how reps are doing. And every company I've been at, every quarter, every time we look at it, the top providers are always under indexed. They're not being called on enough. The middle of the providers sometimes are okay, but those lower priority providers, for whatever reason, are always over indexed. And, a lot of the reason is just, rep behavior. Some of those lower index are easier to call on. They're more welcoming. They're more friendly to reps because they have a little bit lower priority. So maybe they're not as called on as much. So there's a lot of different factors that go into it. And what we look at is we've created a dashboard easily for managers where they can see, okay, here's how many times they should be on the routes. Here's how many times they've been called on in the quarter. And here's how many times Atlas has put them on the route for them. So you can have those clear pictures of, hey, they've been on the route, you haven't called on them. Managers can have those pretty direct conversations with the rep of, hey, what's going on? How can I help you here? Instead of like this not a gotcha moment, it's just, hey, here's some opportunities for us to grow a little bit more and go through there. And we see it across the board. And you mentioned, the lower performing, middle of the pack, top performing reps out there. It really helps to standardize that call plan execution and bring everyone a little closer together on that higher end, just because it's going to help those higher achievers maybe find a couple extra providers in there, but it's going to really help those lower indexing reps say, okay, here's where I should go. I don't have to think about it. Their calls per day go up, their calls on the right providers go up. We always say, our app is really helping reps call on the right providers at the right time for the most success in their territory. And that looks different for every single rep out there.
I was going to say, and that has to be very, that's got a lot of differentiation in that,
Yep.
just based upon the network and who they're calling and routes and all the things, right? There's got to be a lot of complexity to a lot of that. I used to work for a CRO in a previous life, and he was a Harvard grad, and he had all these isms. He used to say one of his was feedback is the breakfast of champions, right? So at the very least, to your point earlier, having conversations with folks to talk about, like it doesn't always have to be the stick, right? It could be the carrot as well, where, leaders in that space might be able to recognize, again, the trends of good people and the trends of the underperforming. But more importantly, to have the conversations to say, you know, to your point, you're on this route, they didn't get met. It's a opportunity to give feedback that will just enhance, their selling careers, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's the not it's the carrot, not the stick, right? It's like
Yeah,
how do
right.
you
Yeah.
help them? And
Yeah.
Just look at it, if each individual rep does better, not only will their payout and their success grow, but then in general, the region and then, the company in general. So the more we can do to help reps perform their best in the field and utilize technology that's out there to do so, it's, like you said, like, why not? Why not
Why
try it,
why
right? Why
wouldn't you
not
use
give it
it?
a shot?
Yeah, yeah. It
Exactly.
just seems like it's such an easy button, right? For
Yep.
people out in the field. So tell me a little bit around, you've got this amazing product. It definitely has some great value presented to it. It could certainly show an ROI to a company that helps implement this. Maybe share some thoughts around what's next. Have you guys thought about like where do we take this to the next level? How do we really integrate this into mainstream to where, your company really blows up? I'm just kind of curious if you've been thinking around the lines of like, okay, we've got the product,
Yep.
we've got the niche, we know this is valuable to people, and where do we go from here? Maybe you can share with, our listeners some next steps.
Yeah, no, we've looked at a number of different things. We started out in the pharmaceutical sales, just because that was kind of my background, where know this very well. But over time, we've had other different kind of divisions of a similar kind of medical sales aspect. So we've had some other interests from kind of med device reps who maybe have some cases in the morning, but then they have some prospecting in the afternoon where they're trying to get some more business in there too. So we've adapted the application a little bit, the algorithm, and really geared it a little bit more towards that. So that's an area we're starting to dip our toe into a little bit to try and grow that. And just based off feedback, right? The beauty of being kind of a small team and being able to be nimble is one of those when we have a good idea, we can be like, okay, here's what we can do. And if when we have those like, little gaps in our schedule from onboarding and stuff like that, we can kind of dive into a little bit. So that's an area we've been focusing on a little bit more. And we've also had some other industries reach out. We've had some other people sign up and ask for some interest from, as simple as just kind of, gardeners who have a route and they have to visit certain providers, and how do they reduce a little bit of that drive time in between and organize their day, pool cleaning services, stuff along those lines where it's a similar problem that they have, and we have to adapt our solution a little bit more, but those are on the next gear. So we're going to just kind of take it slow,
Yeah.
go industry by industry, and grow
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Make it perfect and then, see how you could scale it. As you're talking about it, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, man, you can open this up heavily to the trades, like an electrician, a plumber, HVAC guys, like to your point, pool cleaning services, even cleaning companies. Like as you're saying it, I'm like, there's so many high touch point businesses out there that have to be able to benefit from managing their day a little bit better, right?
Exactly.
I was talking to I had an HVAC go in my house recently. I was talking to, this guy and it's like starting to get hot. So his business is out of control. And he's just like, I can't answer the phone enough. I can't follow up on, people hitting my website enough. I can't respond to my emails enough. And he's kind of, he even admits it, he does a lot of this stuff himself and he's got a crew. But man, I'm just thinking about something like this as a tool for him. Like he can, he's got so much work and he needs to bring on more crews. And I think part of the control thing is, are we maximizing our time on each site and then going to the next site and so on and so forth, which might allow him to be able to kind of get into the running the business stuff that he really needs to do versus crawling around in attics, right? So like just everything that you're saying, my mind's racing thinking, man, this you could really blow this up to a lot of other trades if you wanted to.
Yeah, and that's the goal. We don't want to go too fast and get
Boil the
over our
ocean.
skis
Yeah.
too
Yeah,
much. But
exactly.
at the
Yeah.
same time, we look at it from a perspective of if we just break it down to just drive time in between. If we can minimize 15 to 30 minutes a day for an HVAC guy in terms of drive time between different appointments that they have for the day, then that could be a huge benefit. That could be another client visit. That could be another call. Just bring back time during the day, and that just compounds on it.
That is really cool stuff. I'm curious with the individual folks that you do work with today. I got to imagine there's some internal selling that goes on too, right? Where they're probably telling their peers and they're telling their leadership that, hey, this is a really cool tool. So you almost have your own embedded Salesforce out there too.
Yeah, and that was kind of the second thought behind the individual is if we can get enough you know feedback and adoption within a company from just sales reps, and it just compounds. The word of mouth is a very strong thing, so that is going to only just help us grow. So that was kind of why we just really adapted this to make it really beneficial. And, one of the things we do a lot versus, some of the other companies that I've used, not just not really in that same space, but just in other vendors that are out there working with is our customer service is really high, right? We want to make sure everyone has a really, really good experience and they don't have issues. And if there are an issue or something that looks weird, we have a dedicated line. Our reps call us out and we fix the issue as soon as possible. So it's that's huge for us.
That's kind of the theme of the show too, right? Is how do we bring great technologies? It doesn't just have to be AI. It could be, to your point, building systems that communicate with each other to recognize trends, which in a lot of ways is AI today. But, more importantly, how do you still combine that with people want to buy from people and people want to know that there's someone on the other end of the line that they can call, like if they want to tweak the system or if something isn't working, and there's got to be some human element to make a person feel comfortable down that path. Sounds like that's what you guys are doing.
Yeah, and it's one of those. Hey, there's a lot of AI chatbots out there that companies are using as their customer service, and you don't get to talk to a person anymore. And I feel like as a group of individuals, you just start losing trust a little bit. And I had this earlier today where I was talking with someone. I thought I was talking to someone, and then I was just like, "Wait a second! Like, is this
This isn't a
is
person.
this AI? Is this not a person?" Like, and you kind of just be like, it's good, it's really good, but there's that seed of doubt, and there's something very comforting of talking to another person across the room, on the phone, over email, where they just that context is there. So I think it's got to be a blend of both, right? We got to use technology; it's out there, we got to grow, but at the same time, there has to be that human element to it, and that's what we really try to do with our product, with how we create our offering. It's not just a pure AI where there's one guy behind a screen that's prompting, Claude or ChatGPT. There's a lot of, human element that goes involved here. And just in terms of what we do, it's a lot of that. We want it to be a human feel.
Yeah, that's I applaud it. I think, when you see all these, news events happening around, people laying off 50,000 people, 100,000 people, it's almost given AI this notion of fear, right? I feel like what it's done in the industry in a lot of cases has created a fear factor. You see Cumin talk about it, you see, Elon Musk talk about it, and you see a lot of what I would call just kind of overarching fear around AI. But at the end of the day, I look at it as it's an inhibitor, right? I keep saying inhibitor. It's what it really is it allows people to elevate whatever current role that they have. When I think of like administrators, like people that, you see AI on the scene taking jobs away because now it knows how to run a spreadsheet and now it knows how to collect invoices and now it knows how to, just do all the workflow that say a human might be able to do. What I like to think about is, how do we just flip that on its side? Maybe use AI in a lot of those kind of everyday tasks, but take the human capital that you have that knows the business, that knows how to get things done, make them into more, strategic thinkers and make them more into people that really drive the outcomes that you want out of the business versus the mundane task. So I think there's a world where they come together very nicely, but I think for the moment it's still a little bit of, the unknown that's going on right now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It's there's a lot of sentiment of like, there's still that fear of AI. Like what does it know? How does it do this? And so I think, you gotta play both sides of it. You gotta use it because it's a really powerful tool. And if you're not using it, then you're falling behind. But at the same time, you can't rely on it 100%.
Yeah, yeah, really well said. So anybody that's listening that's maybe thinking about starting their own business, or can you give them some advice around what you feel really worked as you started your business? Could you give them some thoughts around where's the best place to try to think about technology in such a way that is just what we were talking about? It complements their business, but at the same time remains grounded around providing a service that people really want. Just kind of a 30,000 foot view, got a new business owner, any advice you'd give to them just as they're starting out?
Yeah, I think two things. One comes from a mentor of mine who, when I started talking about this, they gave me a lot of pieces of advice. And one thing I've always stuck with is before you launch a new feature, before you launch a new product, make sure that the buyer, your end result buyer, actually wants it or uses it. because in software development or business development, you always think of, oh, if I could just do this, I'm going to be successful. If I could just do this, I'm going to be successful. But there's always going to be things that are not perfect. And if you keep pushing and trying to develop and develop without launching, then you're never going to know. So I think one thing that we've done is always, found a couple initial testers, champions, if you will. And before we launch a new feature, I try and get on a call and I show them, okay, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're looking at. Give me your thoughts. I don't want to prompt you. It's not, is this going to be good? Is this going to be bad? But just, hey, I'm going to lay it out. I'm going to be very non excited about anything, and just what do you think, right? And I want to hear their unsolicited feedback. I think that's number one, is don't worry about having the product be perfect before you launch. It just should just be something that is solving the problem that you're trying to solve. And then the second part of it is, what we've learned is simplicity over everything is amazing. If someone can log into your app, if someone can use your service and understand it without a lengthy training, without a lengthy guide or a walkthrough, and they just like open it and be like, wow, okay, I get it. That's a win. So how can you make it simple? And if it doesn't need to be there, take it out, because you don't need it. Like, we've had more features that we've added that we're like, you know what? Not a good thing. Let's remove
Not,
this. And
yeah.
there's no harm lost. So those
Keep it
those are the
simple,
two.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, no, those are phenomenal ones. As a business owner myself, you touched on it there. It's discipline, it's grit, it's continuing to believe in what you have. You're going to have a lot of naysayers along the way. People that are W-2 employees. It's just the nature of the beast. But everything you just said, along with just some of the practical things that businesses do to work with each other around keeping it simple and easy to understand, and what's the real value that we're bringing. It's hard not to grow whenever you have
Exactly.
that all locked down, which is awesome. Well, anything else you want to share with the audience at all? Any other thoughts or, advice that you might give out there?
I look at it from a perspective of I talked about AI and using that to help you and everything, and see a
Yeah.
lot of the adoption of vibe coding, and I'm just going to create an app and send it out there. And I
Hmm.
think AI, where it is right now, is a really powerful tool to help you, and we use it too, is just getting ideas for user interface, and how do we make this button look, and stuff like that. Where should we put this, stuff along those lines. But I
Yeah.
think the power, kind of going back, is that human element. How does everything interact together? How does it work? What is that result for the end user? And that's one of those things that I would almost like caution people developing software around, is don't just throw it into AI and just say, hey,
Claude
here's
code.
my
Yeah.
idea, build it for me. Right? That's a great start, but there's a lot of
Yep.
that back end. How does everything connect? How does everything work? And what is that feel of it, that I think is
That's
so
right.
important, that you look at some of these apps that come out that are, okay, this is purely AI, because you can just kind of tell that,
Tell.
okay,
Yeah.
this doesn't really work out well. But then there's others that are like, wow, this is really thought out, right? There was
Yeah.
that combination of both. So I think it's
That's
just
right.
that, of looking
That's
at,
right.
how
Yep.
do I use this as a tool, but I'm not going to rely on this 100% of
Yeah, yeah, it's really well said, and it's great advice for again the overwhelming enormity of all the AI tools that are out there. It can get buried really fast, and you could, to your point, also try to make something absolutely perfect, but then really kind of lose the momentum along the way, right? Like
Yep.
most people that buy business to business, B2B, partner to partner, and that's really how you got to look at it, right? This is a partnership, and at the end of the day, the human element brings back to, well, this isn't exactly what we're looking for. Let's alter it or tweak it in this way, and you can start to get pretty into the weeds with technology to try to figure that out. Or you could just have the banter like we're having right now that says, that's cool, but I really like it to do this. And the only way to really get there, in my opinion, is the peer-to-peer activity, right? The human element. So
Absolutely.
it's good
Yeah,
stuff.
completely
Yeah,
agree with
really
that.
good stuff. Well, Brandon, thank you so much. This has been an awesome experience. I'm sure you got a lot of people that will listen to this that will come away with some great tidbits. So thank you for offering some of those up.
Yeah,
At the
thanks
end
for
of the
having me.
day, maybe you'll have a medical rep or somebody listen to this, or farm rep that says this is awesome. So hopefully it nets something out of it for you as well. But can't
I
thank you enough for
appreciate it.
being on the show. We look forward to maybe future podcasts where we start to get, different industry leaders and how kind of their products display and niche together. So if you're open to it, there might be some more opportunities, down the road, and create a panel of, some thought leaders like yourself. But it's great to have your industry expertise and sharing with some of the team here, and can't thank you enough for joining.
Yeah, absolutely. No, open to that. However, I can help. It's always nice to talk about it, and like that human element, right? I think that's
That's
something
right.
very
That's right.
powerful. Just to hear just thoughts going around, and hopefully that your audience gets a little bit out of this, and that's great. So no, thanks for having me today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's been great having you. Thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. All right, take care.